September 1st, 2019. The National Hurricane Center recorded something that had never appeared in the Atlantic hurricane record. Forward speed, 0. A Category 5 hurricane. It wasn't moving, and beneath it, 50,000 people. Most of them are still there. What is coming toward them has already shattered every record in the Atlantic hurricane database. Meteorologists staring at their screens in disbelief. Emergency coordinators flooding radio channels. A prime minister on national television, voice cracking, begging his own people to leave. But here's the thing about a storm that moves at 0 miles per hour. By the time you truly understand what it is, it's already on top of you. This isn't just the story of a hurricane. This is the story of an island that a storm chose and refused to let go. When most of the world hears the Bahamas, they picture something out of a travel magazine. Turquoise water so clear it doesn't look real. White sand that burns your feet at noon. The kind of horizon that makes you forget your problems exist. That image is real, but it's only half the picture. Behind those beaches is a nation of just over 400,000 people. Spread across more than 700 islands, some so remote, the only way in or out is a small boat or a single-engine plane. The economy runs almost entirely on tourism and fishing. There is no industrial cushion, no inland escape route for everyone. When a storm comes, it doesn't just threaten homes, it threatens everything people have built their entire lives around. At the very northern tip of the Bahamian chain sit 2 islands, Grand Bahama and Great Abaco. Together, roughly 76,000 people call them home. Grand Bahama holds Freeport, the country's second largest city. Abaco is quieter. Fishing villages, small harbours, tight-knit communities. And scattered throughout, the informal settlements of Haitian migrants who had lived there for generations, building homes with their hands, working in construction and on the water. Many of them undocumented, many of them with nowhere else to go when the warnings came. These islands had survived storms before. Many storms. The Bahamas sit directly inside the Atlantic hurricane corridor, the highway that the most powerful storms on Earth have traveled for centuries. These people weren't naive. They knew how to board windows. They knew how to read a forecast. They had done this before. But none of them had ever seen a Category 5 make direct landfall on their home. And more importantly, none of them knew what was waiting inside this one. Go back 8 days, August 24th, 2019. Somewhere off the western coast of Africa, a cluster of thunderstorms pulls itself together over warm ocean water and begins to drift westward. At this point, it's nothing. Just a tropical wave. The kind of disturbance that forms dozens of times every hurricane season and dissolves before anyone notices. This one doesn't dissolve. It slowly organizes. It strengthens. It crosses the Atlantic. On August 28th, it passes between Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands as a modest Category 1 hurricane. Some damage, some flooding, nothing catastrophic. Most forecasters at this point believe the storm will curve northward and brush the southeastern United States. The standard track, the expected path. Then, on August 30th, Dorian drifts out over a stretch of open Atlantic between Puerto Rico and the Bahamas. And it finds something. The ocean beneath it is running at over 30 degrees Celsius. Not just at the surface, but deep. A thick layer of warm fuel with no cold water underneath to slow it down. The atmosphere above it is almost completely still. Virtually no wind shear, nothing to tear the storm apart, no resistance at all. Dorian has just entered the perfect incubator. What happens next happens fast. In just 36 hours, this storm goes from a Category 2 to a Category 5. Sustained winds climbing to 185 miles per hour. Central pressure collapsing to 910 millibars. Numbers that make meteorologists go quiet. Numbers that place this storm among the most intense Atlantic hurricanes ever recorded in human history. The National Hurricane Center begins issuing warnings with language that forecasters almost never use. Not cautionary, not advisory, urgent, final. This is your last chance. Prime Minister Hubert Minnis appears on national television and says something no leader wants to say to their own people. Don't be foolish. If you stay, you may not survive. Tens of thousands evacuate. They leave everything behind. Furniture, photographs, pets, businesses, and they go. But not everyone can. For the families living in the low-lying shanty communities of Abaco, for the undocumented migrants who fear what might happen if they present themselves to government officials at an evacuation point, for the elderly, the sick, the people simply trapped by circumstance. Leaving isn't a choice they can make. They board up their windows. They move to interior rooms. They hold their children. They pray. And they wait. Here is where this storm stops being a hurricane and becomes something else entirely. High above Dorian, in the upper levels of the atmosphere, something is breaking down. The steering currents, the invisible rivers of wind that push tropical systems along their tracks, are collapsing. A massive high-pressure system sitting over Bermuda is acting like a wall the storm cannot pass. A second system to the south creates a pull in the opposite direction. Dorian is trapped. And so, on the morning of September 1st, 2019, the most powerful hurricane ever to make landfall in the Bahamas does something that almost no Atlantic storm has ever done at this intensity. It stops. Not slows, not weakens, stops. The National Hurricane Center officially records its forward speed at 0 miles per hour. A Category 5 hurricane, parked over a single residential island for 41 consecutive hours. Jeff Masters, one of the most respected meteorologists on the planet, would later say it plainly: "We have never had a Category 5 stall for this long in the Atlantic hurricane record." Think about what that means. A normal hurricane moves through a location in hours. The worst of it, the eyewall, the peak destruction, passes over in a matter of minutes at most. People endure it. They shelter. They survive. And then the storm moves on. Dorian did not move on. The eyewall, carrying winds of 185 miles per hour, sat over the same communities, the same streets, the same homes for nearly 2 full days. Storm surge that would have receded under a moving storm simply stayed, swallowing cars, then first floors, then rooftops. People who had sheltered in place and survived the initial surge woke up the next morning to find the water still rising, still there, with no end in sight. A mother clutched a 4-month-old baby and recorded a video with shaking hands. "Please, pray for us. Please, please." People are trying to make it to the other side, but the water just took them. On the streets of Freeport, entire vehicles disappeared beneath the floodwaters. Homes, not damaged, not flooded, erased, lifted from their foundations and scattered. A physician who had trained for crisis after crisis would later say she had never in her life experienced anything she was less prepared for. And still, the storm did not move. There's a moment inside a hurricane, inside the eye, when everything goes quiet. The winds stop. The sky opens. You can see stars sometimes, or thin blue sky above you. And for a brief, surreal moment, it feels like it might be over. For the people of Grand Bahama, that moment came. And then the other wall hit. Because the eye had barely moved, the back eye wall struck with nearly the same force as the first. The same communities, the same streets. What hadn't been destroyed in the first wave was destroyed now. By the time the storm finally began to drift northward and weaken, the island beneath it was unrecognizable. Entire neighborhoods on Abaco were gone. Not damaged, gone. The shanty communities where Haitian families had lived for decades were wiped so completely that aerial photographs looked like bare earth. Survivors waded through chest-deep water carrying nothing. Rescue teams landing by boat described scenes that felt biblical. The scale of destruction simply didn't fit a single storm. The death toll from Dorian in the Bahamas would reach at least 70 confirmed, but the true number is almost certainly higher. Hundreds were listed as missing for months afterward. Many of those were undocumented migrants whose families had no official way to report them gone. 70 confirmed, hundreds missing, a number that may never be fully known. Here is the thing that stays with you after you learn about Hurricane Dorian. It wasn't the wind speed that made it the deadliest storm in modern Bahamian history. Plenty of powerful storms have struck and moved on. It was the stillness, the refusal to leave, the way it sat over one place, over people's homes and lives and families for nearly 2 days, as if it had made a decision. Climate scientists in the aftermath pointed to something deeply unsettling. Warming ocean temperatures and shifting atmospheric patterns are increasingly creating conditions where storms can stall, where they can linger, where the thing that used to save you, the storm eventually passing, becomes something you can no longer count on. Dorian was not the first stalling storm. It was, however, the most devastating demonstration of what that behavior looks like when it combines with Category 5 intensity. The people of the Bahamas rebuilt. They are still rebuilding. Some communities that were erased have not fully returned. Some people who left never came back. The storm is gone, but what it left behind, in the landscape, in the data, and in the people who survived it, remains.